So, hope everyone's doing okay. Hmm. So I was thinking about, it just came to me, of doing a little extra metta. Mm. It's something that we should always be practicing on different times and levels. Can never take it for granted. Just like you can't take, clarity and awareness and mindfulness for granted. So cultivating loving kindness and compassion, not something that we should think, okay, I've, done a retreat on that. So I think I've got it under control, because anytime we see around us or within us some strong negativity or any type of negative conditioning arise, it's time to practice a bit of metta and karuna, some kindness and compassion, some love. And they're really one thing, because to love someone or something is to want them to be um, happy and free of suffering. So you have to care about their suffering enough. Someone sent me a a short video of um, in one of the crazy, um, violent riots and protests that are going on in quite a few American cities. Um, my friend is actually from Minneapolis, and she sent me a clip that someone took of this middle-aged black woman who um, was hugging a police officer, and just sort of all around that that image was a kind of stillness. Like everyone just kind of stopped and sort of filmed it. It was kind of this stillness, this altruistic love and compassion. And she was crying, and he was just they were holding each other. And it was just so clear that, the differences melted away. Just two people caught up in circumstances way beyond their control. And remembering their common humanity in that moment. And that type of altruistic love, um, that heartfelt wish for peace and safety and happiness. And with it, an acknowledgement of the suffering is all kind of captured in that moment. And in that truth, there was the stillness around them. So I think we should find inspiration and um, see the hostility that is so quickly manifesting itself around us as an opportunity to practice more strongly our kindness and compassion, wishes and intentions, so that we don't get caught up in the divisions that are creating so much pain. There and here. I don't think they are such different situations. Um, so as I said in the end of the meditation, um, we don't know what the loving kindness and compassion is doing for the other person. It may not change their situation at all, but it does change the way we relate to them. And hopefully also when we relate in a real way. But to relate in a real way, we need to practice diligently. So that when you do meet hostility, you'll be able to be skillful with it and not just mirror it, which is the most common response. So when you see police and protesters acting really similarly, it's no surprise. Because we react in kind, similarly to whatever we're experiencing. So as a practitioner, we have to say, I am renouncing that. I'm renouncing that. I am renouncing hostility. Renunciation here. We often think of renunciation and abandoning something and being homeless in a Buddhist way as like leaving the good things, like the Buddha leaving the palace. But we can also consider renunciation as leaving all the negative conditioning that I have inherited and I've been, reinforcing for much of my life. All the prejudices and all of the reactions and all of the judgment to myself and others. So that we need to leave home. So the home leaving means leaving as well some of the conditioning you received in your home, whether your childhood home or your, societal home. So, we need to leave home in order to come back home and improve it, make it a better home. So we need to renounce that negative condition. And you do that by really in a meditative way, observing those reactions come up without judgment, to really be familiar with all of that conditioning without denying that it's there. I can have a lot of loving kindness and compassion in my hopes and dreams. And then when I meet hostility, suddenly a very strong conditioning comes up. So there's no shortcut to it. And one does not, one does not deny the other. The fact that you may have strong negative conditioning, anger, hostility, judgment, fear, prejudice, does not contradict the fact that you can have great compassion and kindness that you're working on. But this is where the awareness needs to be cultivated very strongly. So you can be very mindful of it arising, so that then you no longer get pulled by it until you find yourself in a situation where, how did I get here? So we should try to enter that space of stillness that woman and policeman had, of that hug, of that common humanity, of recognizing the unity of our existence, of our interbeing. So whenever you face difficulty, you should pause and rediscover a little stillness within that. And from that place, there is compassion and kindness. And it does not deny the fact that at the same time, you may be feeling great anger and hostility. But the more you encourage the compassion and kindness, the stronger that will become, and the weaker the hostility and aggression becomes. But right now, they are coexisting in us. And we need to acknowledge that if we want to be real and do good. So just one other thought about renunciation is that there are kind of 4 types of renunciation, 4 ways we can think of, like abandoning something. There's an outer renunciation, where we are abandoning or leaving either pleasure or pain or outside things, the Buddha and the palace. There's inner renunciation, where we are renouncing, we're letting go of the attachment we have to these things. Like you can leave outer things and still be really missing it and struggling with that. So at the same time, you need to be working on inner renunciation, where the inner home leaving. So that even if you're at home, you can, from an inner place, be leaving home. So you can still be in the same environment that you've grown up in, right? With a lot of the triggers that are still working on you. And you can be working on renouncing it. Sometimes it's good to have the outer renunciation. Yeah, you go to a different place and you feel like you can reinvent yourself. But eventually everybody does end up returning home in some way. And then they have a shock of, wow, I thought I got away from it. I thought I let it go. And then you're back and you realize the same triggers are working very strong. So there's the inner renunciation that you do in the place you are. Being aware of all of that coming up, the conditioning, accepting it with kindness and compassion. Here it is. Sort of embracing it with that stillness around it. There's that embrace. And then it's no longer an enemy. It's no longer a threat. It's conditioning that I can deal with skillfully. Does that mean it won't come up again? No. That's also a delusion to think that by being aware of it, it won't come up again. No, it will come up again. Maybe it'll keep coming up. But you can deal with it with that, embrace of stillness. Which is that kind awareness where you care enough to look at it directly and say, it's okay. I see you and I know where you're coming from. And you don't need to get out of control. This is a safe place in your own mind and heart. So that's the inner renunciation. The third type of renunciation is renouncing the sense of separation between self and other, which again, the embrace between the woman and the officer, sort of symbolized. A sense of, we are one in this situation. So that your struggle is not just your struggle, it's also everyone else's struggle. You're not doing this alone. We are all struggling with similar things. We happen to call them different things, different names, different histories. But to be human is to struggle with the difficulties and the conditioning that have led us to feel very separate and combative. So that's the third type of renunciation, saying, I'm not doing this just for myself. I'm not working just on myself. To work on myself is also to work on everyone else. To realize that we're all interconnected here. So it's renouncing that sense of separation. And the fourth level of renunciation is called renunciation of renunciation. Where you kind of, renounce the thought that this is going to solve all your problems. It's a good practice, but there's no ultimate solution. You just got to keep working on it. So you renounce the thought that, like, okay, I've got this down now. It's it's a long, long, dedicated practice. And you don't go around saying, like, yeah, we're all one now. We're all one now. We're all in this together. Some of the people who are being oppressed, they don't feel like they're in it with you. And it's not very helpful to say, well, no, actually, no. Your reality is, your conditioning and your situation is very different. So that's the renunciation. Renunciation is where we come back to our differences. And we say, okay, how can I use this skillfully? in a way that's going to be helpful and not harmful. So only once you go through, you start with being a very separate person with your struggles. You go through letting go of that, and then you return to in order to use those differences skillfully and not buy into them and not believe them as, the true story. Our lives are a bit of a fiction, but the fiction is instructive and helpful. So if it's good fiction, then you can write a good story. Right? It doesn't mean you abandon the story completely. You just see it as a story that you're writing. So when you see that, then you renounce renunciation, and you can come back to the story and write a better one, or keep writing it, revise your story. That's the renunciation. So, one of the Zen teachers I have been attracted to, Kodo Uchiyama, opening the hand of thought. And he wrote to do meditation with zazen. That meditation is seeing this world from the coffin without yourself. So there's something really starkly refreshing from that. Like Dogen says, to study the Buddha way, or to practice, is to study the self. And study self is to forget the self. Kodo Uchiyama says to do zazen, to do meditation, is to see the world from the coffin. So what would the world be like without me? If I'm walking down the street and I'm looking around at reality, what would it be like to look at it as if I'm not there? Or this situation as if I'm not there? It's kind of refreshing, because we tend to always think about what's my perspective. What's the world's perspective? What's everybody else's perspective? What if I were to see it from everyone else's point of view and not just impose mine? I know it seems like an impossible task, but in a sense, the practice of meditation is a little bit like that. When we're simply observing what's arising, including observing your thoughts, without a sense of strong identification, of defining oneself. So you can label the thoughts, but you're not labeling them as me and mine. There can be anger, and there can be aggression, there can be fear, and there can be, boredom. But you're not saying like, I can't do this because I'm bored, right? You're just noticing this. So if we start to be able to do that more skillfully and more regularly as a way of life throughout the day, to notice and to label your thoughts and feelings as very real and there, but not me. It means that you don't have to define yourself by it, which means that you're renouncing identity with those things, which means that you can keep writing your story, you can revise it, you can turn the page right now if you're not so strongly identified with the feelings and thoughts you're having. If you're looking at the world a little bit from the coffin. That's what Uchiyama's saying, but we can just say in terms of, non-identifying, that non-attachment to one's own thoughts. That's the subtlest form. That's inner renunciation. We could say that's the inner renunciation. And then you renounce that and you say, okay, well, now I'm going to function as me in the world. Okay. But you're able to do that in a more skillful way because you've gone through these other levels of renunciation, or letting go, or non-attachment. These are all words saying a similar thing. I'm just using the word renunciation. You could talk about non-attachment or just letting go. So what I wanted to speak about a little bit tonight, but I was inspired by the recent news that's going on since we met last, is I want to talk a little bit about poverty and wealth, which is a great source of either renunciation or attachment. Coming from one of the sayings in the Dhammapada, Buddha said, contentment is the greatest wealth. Contentment, being satisfied and happy with what I have. That's being content. Contentment is the greatest wealth. So that quote actually came from, there was a meeting where a teaching where the Buddha was teaching, and there was a King Pasenadi of Kosala. He's come a few times in the sutras, and he came to listen to the Buddha. And it says in the sutra that he'd eaten a big morning meal, like a really big morning meal. Like that's what he always did. And so he found it really hard to stay awake during the Buddha's teaching. And the Buddha noticed this. And he said to the king, he said, you should start eating less each day until you get to 1/16 of what you normally have, which I guess that means he was eating a lot. So 1/16. And the king actually did it, and he became thin and energized and happy, and he reported this to the Buddha. And in response, the Buddha said to him, well, health is the greatest gift, contentment is the greatest wealth, a trusted friend is the greatest relative, and nibbana is the greatest bliss. So, health, contentment, trusted friend, nibbana. That pretty much is all you need. But he's telling us to the king who has wealth and power, and now health and happiness and contentment. So the idea of contentment being wealth, we see this in a lot of spiritual traditions. Who is the wealthy man, the person who is happy with what he has. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, though, it's almost in some ways seen as a poverty then, and world leaving and wealth leaving takes on a certain spiritual practice and value. That we don't really find in Judaism so much, but in some traditions where you have monkhood, definitely. And so that even Dogen, many years later, he said that being poor is to be intimate with the way. And he said studying poverty, and when he says study, he means practicing, like studying the Buddha way. Studying poverty above all, studying the way is above all studying poverty. Study poverty, live in poverty, and immediately you're closer to the way. So we have to wonder how to take this. And there is something very true about how ownership can very often interfere in a sneaky way with our sort of aspirations, our spiritual aspirations. I remember when I just finished my BA, and I was going to take a year to travel, and I was in Toronto meeting with my cousin who was a very successful lawyer, and big house, few cars, everything. And I told him my plans. I was going to go just with a small backpack for like a year and a half. And he said to me, that's great, you should do that now, because later on, when you have things, they own you. Wow. Couldn't believe it. I was hearing it, and then I knew, like I saw it. I mean, he could never get away. I mean, he could never get away. Either, You have to not only buy the things, but keep paying for them. But when you have things, when you possess things, they own you. And that was like a real piece of wisdom, but it was just a saying for him because he's never going to leave his things. And I understood that, but not really, because I sort of just thought, that's your life. I'll be different. But no, to be in the world of things is to be limited by things. The question is, how can we renounce things and renounce the renunciation of things? This is the really subtle practice of being in the world but not being defined by the world, of having thoughts and not being defined or identified by them. The same way we look at our thoughts, we want to look at our possessions and the awareness we have. And it's a training we need to do over and over again. So Suzuki Roshi says that renunciation is not that you give up things, but you accept that they're going to go away. You accept that they're going to go away. So it's more your understanding of the nature of all things, animate and inanimate. It's having that same nature of really, impermanent and non-self, and possibly a source of dukkha, having the three natures there of reality, anicca, anatta, dukkha. So if we understand not just the self, but things like that also, then our understanding of poverty and wealth starts to shift a little bit. So when we talk about being poor and understanding poor, when Dogen is talking about that, I want to understand it a little better. Because most of us live in the world, and those of us especially who will work and have families, we're taking on physical poverty as a practice. It's not an option. It's just not an option. It's not a responsible option. But thinking I'll make lots of money in order to give it all away is also probably not an option, and perhaps a convenient excuse. So what is the way that we can approach wealth and poverty in a way to practice it, to become, as Dogen says, to be intimate with the way? What kind of poverty is it? And it's obviously connected deeply to renunciation. So in a later way of the later saying of the Dhammapada, we're in a chapter called The Fool. And it's written, "Look at me, look at all my wealth and possessions. The fool suffers by being attached to these things. But he doesn't even own himself. So where is his wealth? Whose are his possessions?" This goes straight to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? You don't even own yourself. How can you own other things? And whose possessions are they? So when we understand the true illusion of self, and we understand it as a useful and possibly skillful and very helpful illusion, then we see ownership as just part of that game. It's not really mine because I'm not really me. So I don't need these things to make me me. If I truly understand the nature of self, then I understand that things are not going to make myself better. But as we say these words, these are just words. The real practice then is to truly understand the nature of self. To do that in meditation, we're looking again and again, and we are renouncing attachment to thoughts and feelings by noticing them, accepting them, and letting them pass. And then we become more intimate with the way, because it is the way of release, the way of liberation, freedom. Freedom from being owned by things, as my cousin said. Well, he didn't give me the way to do that. He just said it'll happen or which we now have a way to be free of being owned by things, and to consider the sense of self you have as another thing. Can you look at yourself in this great product that you've made over the decades as like another thing, as like a house that you built? And when the Buddha saw through it, he said, like, I've stopped building this house. The builder of this house is this self that I'm constructing out of this fear that, I need a really strong building to be secure. But we'll never be secure enough if it's dependent on something like that. So then we'll always need something more to buttress, to reinforce it. Whether it's things we own or my sense of self and success and thoughts. So if we can, as Kodo Uchiyama said, you're looking from the coffin. In the coffin, there's nothing more to buy. There's nothing to buy there, right? You're not going to enjoy any more things from that place. So by contemplating for a moment the fact that one of the things that Dogen said, which I found, again, to this point, he said, when impermanence suddenly arrives, and he means death, when impermanence suddenly arrives, kings, ministers, friends, spouse, children, and precious treasures cannot help you. We go to the world of the dead by ourselves. The only things that accompany us are our own wholesome or unwholesome karma we have cultivated. So this is a powerful statement that kind of is a little splash of cold water. Explaining a little more what seeing the world from the coffin is about. That sense of what true wealth and true poverty are. That to understand the true wealth is to understand that the only thing I really own is my karma. I don't own the actions, the good and the bad I've created in this world. The benefit and harm I've created are the only things that I actually own. Everything else is not mine. Everything else is not mine. The only thing that will accompany me throughout my life are the wholesome or unwholesome karma that I've created. And that will continue. And so the new page means, and the revision of the story that I'm writing means I'm going to revise this karma today, now. This is the strong effort and the resolve we make. Letting go is not enough. Resolving to create wholesome karma is what needs to happen after the letting go. Letting go creates that space so then you can fill it with wholesome karma. But if you're defined by your negative thoughts and feelings, you won't have the space to create wholesome karma because you're still holding on to who you think yourself is, who you think you are. And this all comes back to our practice of meditation. It's the laboratory of observing, noticing, seeing conditioning arise, seeing it pass. It's a laboratory of practicing non-identification and non-attachment to that. And it's the laboratory of, within that space, starting to cultivate some wholesome intentions, like loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy. So, you don't need to say, okay, I'm gonna, throughout my day, I'm gonna have this new story, I'm a new person, new chapter. I say, haircut, starting over. That's a nice thought, but let that thought go. That thought can be renounced. But during the laboratory of meditation, where you're observing your mind conditioning, you're allowing it to release. You're not judging it. And you're creating space so that you can be at peace and content in your moment. Content doesn't mean I like it or don't like it, but I observe the liking and not liking, and I don't identify it. I don't label myself by that. I take this time to observe, to release, and then to allow some positive motivation to come, which is the wholesome karma. So the poverty then is, releasing and renouncing all of the ownership I have been accruing throughout my life, which has been mountains of selfhood and a lot of objects too. But that's just basically to make myself feel better. And then once I've renounced the outer renunciation, then there's the inner renunciation. And then there's renunciation of self and other, that separation. And then there's coming back to it and saying, okay, well, how am I going to use this skillfully now? That's a renunciation of renunciation. So when it comes to things, and I want to be careful that when we're talking about poverty and wealth, that's not to deny the fact that we live in a material, partially material world, that we need to function with material things, and we need to use them wisely and skillfully to do the best and create wholesome karma here with that. So how to navigate that, how to use those. So the Buddha addressed this when he talked about 4 types of happiness for a householder. 4 kinds of sukha that householders can have, dealing with material things, dealing with wealth. The Buddha taught about wealth to householders because they were not going to renounce it. They were not going to abandon it and take up the homeless life of the monk. No. They had their jobs, they had their families, okay, and they had their children. So what do you do? That possessing enough material, having enough material possessions is one type of happiness. Meaning if you're feeling a serious lack or deprivation, what does it do? So the type of poverty that we're talking about here, and especially what Dogen is talking about, is not talking about giving up all your material things. Right? We're talking about an attitude towards material things. What is the middle way there? To be in the world, but not be defined by the world. It's a subtle way. It's a subtle middle way. So when the Buddha says having enough material possessions, there is this one sutra called the Lion's Roar Sutra, the Chakravarti Sutta. And it tells a story of where the Buddha is telling a story about this king from many ages in the past. And there were many poor people in his kingdom. And he asked the sage what he should do about it. And the sage said, wise person said, oh, you should, give some material possessions or land to poor people. So he gave some, but he didn't really know how to do it properly. So there were a lot of, disparities, a lot of differences between rich and poor. And some of the poor people then started to steal because they didn't have enough. And one of the poor people who stole was caught. And the king asked him, why did you do this? Why were you stealing? And he said, because I didn't have enough to live and to support my family. So the king gave him a piece of land and said, that should be enough for you to, have a farm and to provide for yourself and your family. Now, other people saw that and they started to steal too, thinking that, well, then the king will give them a piece of land. And he did that for a while until it got out of control, and so many people were stealing. And the king said, like, this is not a righteous king. And the king said, okay, enough already. And he killed the next thief that was found in order to dissuade everybody from doing that. But of course, people were not so much dissuaded, but they took the example of the king and they said, well, if we kill people, then we'll be able to take all their possessions. So that then occurred. And then in the conclusion of the sutra, it says, thus, from not giving a property properly to the needy, poverty became great. And from the increase of poverty, the taking of what was not given increased. And from the increase of theft, the use of weapons increased. From the increase of use of weapons, the taking of life increased. The sutra is showing that there is a very strong correlation between physical poverty, violence, and the taking of life. That there is a responsibility society has to make sure that people are provided for on a material level. And that poverty is not only bad for that person, but it's bad for society because it's going to lead to it inevitably, leads to other crimes and violence. So one of the ways to reduce violence, crime, and even murder in a society is making sure that everybody has a decent livelihood and wage. And so one of the 4 ways that the Buddha said of being happy in the other sutra is there's having enough material possessions, having right livelihood, having a livelihood that you can maintain a decent, level, not being in debt, because anyone who's been in debt knows that it kind of is poison inside of you. The fear and the anxiety and the worry of being in debt can cause, serious pain to somebody. So there's having enough material possessions, having a good livelihood, not being in debt. And the 4th way that material possessions can create happiness for householders. Okay. And this is the 4th way was sharing them with others. Dhamma. So we see here that for householders, there are 4 ways to deal with material life. You have enough, you have a proper work, okay? You try to avoid debt, and you give to others. Those are ways of relating to the material world that will, as the Buddha said, increase sukha, or happiness for householders. This is a very nuts and bolts, concrete approach. It's not trying to say, they need to be, non-attached to their things. No, the way you practice non-attachment, if you're a householder, is by sharing, is by giving. All right, and that's why the giving is there. It's not going to get into the spiritual aspect of it. It's going to say, you have things, you give things, right? And where are you getting them from? From a good job, right? That right livelihood. So this is all very, you could even say common sense, but we lose common sense when we start to get confused by our own fears, our greed, our hatreds, and our delusion. Our attachments, aversions, and delusion create confusion so that we start to relate to the material world in an unhealthy way. And here is giving us something really basic. If you're a householder, if you're a layperson, relate to the material world in this way. Have enough, have a decent job, stay out of debt, give to others. It's good. We see that on a societal basis, if there are huge, huge inequalities in our society, it's going to create violence. It's going to do that, for sure. So we want to work at some of the causes. So the outer poverty here, as we see when Dogen is talking about poverty, he's not necessarily saying you should be in the world and be without any possessions. If that's your chosen way, yes. But really the poverty here is an approach to life, an approach to things where they are a means to an end, not an end in itself. And the means is a way of creating wholesome karma. So we have physical things and we have material wealth and we have money in order to create good karma with it, to have wholesome karma with that. But if the objects and the things are an end in themselves, then we start to identify with them, and then the self is in trouble because we're identifying with illusions. So I wanted to just share another piece then from the Dhammapada, where after on the section of the fool, he says, the path that leads to worldly gain and the path that leads to liberation are different paths. Seeing thus, the disciple, the renunciate disciple, the person who's renouncing, avoids the distraction of worldly gain and success to dwell in solitude. So that is really quite, straight to the point. The path of worldly gain and the path of liberation are different paths. If that's your goal. But if your goal is liberation, you can still have worldly gain, but that's not your goal. That's not your goal. If it's your goal, then it's a different path. It's a different path. Your thoughts, your mind, and your intentions are for that. If your intention is liberation of self and others, right? Then you may need to be involved in worldly things in order to, work effectively in this environment, because you're not in a monastery right now. And in this section of the wise, I will share with you. Virtuous beings are unattached. They do not indulge in heedless speech about sensual pleasures. They experience both joy and sorrow, but are possessed by neither. They experience both joy and sorrow, but are possessed by neither. So this is the real, liberation, that we experience what we experience in life. Sometimes pleasure from sensual things, from objects, but just we experience it with non-attachment. We're not possessed by them. We don't feel like they own us, so I need to take care of them. I'm using it to take care of myself. How can I take care of myself with these things? Take care of my aspiring, Buddha self. And finally, freeing themselves from longing, unhindered by grasping. Those who align themselves with the way delight in non-attachment, and here's the key, while still in the world, are radiant. Delight in non-attachment, and while still in the world, are radiant. So this is really the true poverty here, when I'm talking about poverty and wealth, and the true renunciation. We are renunciate disciples. We're trying to renounce more, right? Meaning we're renouncing our attachment to things as me and mine. And then I can delight in the world. I can delight in that. I can say, I'm free from that. And by being free from that, I can renounce renunciation. I can come back to it and use it. There are the 10 ox herding pictures, where in the beginning, the boy is searching for the ox and goes through these pictures which symbolize different stages of awakening. And the last stage is where he goes back to the marketplace. It's not the empty circle. In the middle, there's the empty circle, where there's like emptiness. But that's not the final stage. The final stage is renunciation of renunciation, where you end up going back to the marketplace. You end up being involved with the sensual world, but not being possessed by it. Being liberated, being still in the world, radiant, radiant. that's it's a high calling. It's a high calling because on one level, like the first stage is kind of the easiest one, just to say either one of two extremes. I'm going to just go for success and accept the standards that I've been given. And that's a first stage for most people. Or to reject it totally and say, I'm leaving it, I reject it. But that's the other extreme. And remember, a while ago, we read the Buddha's first teaching at Sarnath. And the first teaching was the middle way. And the middle way was avoiding extremes, the extreme of self-denial or the extreme of self-indulgence. And we still find ourselves trying to meet that balance of being in the world, of delighting in non-attachment, but still here, still here. And one of the things that can help us with this is to see the non-duality of wealth and poverty. In a sense, and I'll finish with this. There's in the Japanese sort of mythology, there's these two goddesses. One is called Kichijoten, and the other one is called Kokuanten. Kichijoten and Kokuanten. Kichijoten is the goddess of wealth. She's beautiful. And Kokuanten is the goddess of misfortune. And she's ugly. But what's interesting is that they are always depicted together. You don't see a picture with just one of them. They're always together. That, fortune and misfortune, wealth and poverty exist simultaneously. They exist together. And, along comes wealth and the poverty. Kokuanten is right there as well. She's ready, and the other way goes as well. So when we start to see the unity of that, like the unity of death and life, so if I see the world from the coffin, it means it's not like this death and life. It's that I can see the world from a place where I have already let go of things. What's it like? What's it like? What is non-attachment like? What would it be like if I look around at things and I say, not mine, not me, not mine? To not be possessed by things that we possess. And whatever that thing is, whether it's relationships, nationhood, identity, religion, in the end, the poverty we're talking about is not just about objects. It's about all concepts, things, and beliefs that we hold. So we need to renounce also the difficult and painful conditioning. We need to have some inner poverty so that I can feel like I've let go of these biases, these opinions, these judgments, these fears. And then I'll have that silence. There's nothing as silent as a coffin. I imagine. I haven't really tried it, but I imagine there's nothing as silent as lying inside a coffin. But from that silence, we can imagine it's the same sort of silence of the embrace of that Black woman in the police officer. That silence of the death of the ego. The death of the ego. The death of your separate self. In that place, even in the midst of all the noise, there's the silence of truth that you're together here. And we share a common cause. That's the liberation of pain and the full realization of happiness. So before we have a short sitting again, is there anything anyone would like to add or say?
I'm just curious, Daniel. I know this question might be out of context, so I apologize in advance. But is there any relation in the Dharma to fulfillment? You know, like we talk a lot in the Western world about having a fulfilled career or life or whatever. And just curious if that's mentioned in somehow in the teachings.
What do you mean by fulfillment?
Like pursuing a career that will fulfill me, or I don't know. Everybody has their own idea about what will be kind of self-actualization. I can see it's a bit out of context with what you were talking about, but like still in the if when we're still laymen and we're still very interested in liberation at the same time, is there any sort of something in the teaching about that? That makes sense.
Yeah. So look, I mean, there's some of the writings talk about, and in some of the sutras, it talks about, you know, using material wealth in order to, you know, contribute and to give, right? So dana is a big thing, but in a sense of fulfillment, of your own personal fulfillment, when we start to identify and we see that like our goal is cultivating certain qualities, inner qualities, you know, of patience and wisdom and, you know, energy and those types of things, that when we see that our path, whatever path it is, whether it's even in work, that it's the work is starting to help me cultivate these qualities, you know, then that's the definition of fulfillment. Is, you know, it doesn't mean it's you're a monk. It just means that, you know, your priority is to cultivate enlightened qualities, and this choice of work or livelihood or relationship is helping you do that, right? So that makes it very fulfilling, because what are you trying to fill? You're trying to fill these qualities, right? Either the paramitas or the Brahma Viharas, you know, or a sense of, you know, samadhi and peace and well-being in your life and that happiness. So what is cultivating that? So when you see it, it's not so much what I want to do, but what's going to serve as a vehicle, an opportunity to greater cultivate these qualities. You know, what's going to help me be more generous and help me be more patient and help me be more energetic and help me be more mindful and help me be more moral and help me be more wise. You know, when I look at the 6 paramitas, those are like ways that if I see my work as helping cultivate that, then my work's going to be fulfilling. The work in itself is not going to be fulfilling. What the work helps you cultivate will make the work fulfilling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you. This is the investment actually in the qualities of the mind.
The investment is in the qualities of the mind, and then seeking out places and situations that help you develop those. And then that place will seem fulfilling.
Right. Thank you.
I just to add to that, a short thing, you know, somebody called me the other day and asked about, he had been traveling for a while in spiritual places, meditation places, and he came back and he wanted to find meaningful work, and he didn't know how to combine his search and his journey and his path with work, you know. and work that will kind of be consistent with his seeking and his practice. And I said, well, first of all, like there's wrong livelihood, you know, you can avoid that pretty easily. But when it comes to right livelihood, it really has more to do with very much what you are bringing into it. And any work situation, unless it's like a really negative place, you know, is going to be pretty neutral. Yeah. But what is it that of your practice you can bring into that? And in the beginning stages, you can't just, you know, it needs to be more of a parallel, perhaps. But the worldly life is sort of a tool that can be used for wholesome or unwholesome karma. The tool in itself is not going to be good or bad. It's what you use that tool for. So, you know, whether it's this job or another job, that job is not going to do it for him. It's not going to be something, yeah, this is the fit. How are you going to make it fit? You know, that's it. How is it going to become a tool that you then are working on your own mind? Different situations, especially worldly ones, are tools that we use to work on our minds. Yeah. But the tool's not going to do it for you. The same person could go into that and use the very same tool for just like encouraging, you know, lust and greed. And you can use that tool to, you know, create greater patience and equanimity and perhaps kindness, compassion. So it's a sort of a, instead of looking for the work that's going to match your mind, you want to try to like transform and use it as an opportunity to transform your mind. And that's true also of even meditation places. You go to a retreat center and you may think this is going to do it for me. This is the right place. You know, give it a day. And you see it's, you know, it's just another tool for working on your mind. In some ways, it was even easier at work. Yeah. So let us finish now for with a minute to sit and finish in silence now.